The kitchens of Valemore Palace smelled of smoke and roasted meat, and Alira Voss had spent so many years there that she barely noticed the heat anymore. She moved between the long stone tables with practiced ease, her hands steady even when her feet ached, her eyes always lowered in the way servants were taught from childhood. No one looked twice at her. That was how she liked it. She had grown up in this palace without knowing where she came from. The older cooks said she had been found as a baby near the eastern gates, wrapped in a plain gray cloth, with no name and no family to claim her. They called her a stray, though never to her face, not since she had grown old enough to understand what the word meant. She had built a quiet life around that emptiness. She worked hard, she spoke little, and she hid, beneath the sleeve of her left arm, a strange silver mark shaped like a crescent moon wrapped in vines. It had been there since birth, and it had never once faded, no matter how many years passed. Tonight, the palace was alive with noise and firelight. King Draven Ashgrave had returned from the Northern Territories after crushing the last of 3 rival packs that had once dared to challenge his rule. The great hall was filled with nobles in silver and black, their laughter sharp and their eyes hungry for the king's attention. Alira had been assigned, along with a dozen other servants, to carry wine to the high table where Draven sat like a storm given human shape. She had seen him only from a distance before. Up close, he was more unsettling. He had the build of a man carved from stone, dark hair pushed back from a face that rarely softened, and eyes the color of a winter sky, pale and merciless. When he spoke, the room quieted. When he laughed, it was brief and without warmth. Everyone in Valemore knew the stories. He had taken the throne at 19 after his father's death, and in the years since, he had never lost a single battle. He ruled through strength alone, and he made no secret of his belief that strength was the only thing worth respecting. Alira kept her head down as she approached the high table, a jug of dark red wine balanced carefully in both hands. She was almost past him, when a noble beside the king rose too quickly, his chair scraping loud against the floor, and the sudden movement threw her off balance. The jug tipped. A wave of wine splashed across the hem of Draven's ceremonial cloak, the pale fabric turning a deep, spreading red. The hall fell silent. Draven rose slowly from his seat, and the silence deepened, as if the whole room had stopped breathing. He looked down at the ruined cloak, then at Alira, who stood frozen with the empty jug still in her hands. "Do you know what this cloak represents?" His voice was quiet, which somehow made it worse than shouting. "It was worn by every Ashgrave king before me, and you have stained it like it means nothing." "I am sorry, my king," Alira said, her voice steady despite the pounding of her heart. "It was an accident." "An accident?" He said the word as though tasting something bitter. "Tell me, girl, what is your name?" "Alira, my king." "Alira," he repeated it slowly, as if testing whether it deserved to be spoken in his hall. "You have no family name, do you? No pack, no lineage. You are nothing but a stray this palace took pity on." He looked around at the watching nobles, and something cold flickered behind his eyes, the need to remind everyone present exactly where power lived in this room. "You are worthless, a servant with no blood worth mentioning, spilling wine on a king's cloak, as if her hands know nothing of what respect means." Laughter rippled through the hall, soft and cruel, the kind that spreads because people are afraid not to join in. Alira felt her face burn, but she did not look away from him. Something inside her went very still and very quiet, the way the air goes still before a storm. "I will clean it myself, my king," she said, and then she bowed and walked away, the empty jug still clutched in her hands, before he could say anything more. She did not cry, not even later that night, when she scrubbed the stone floor of the kitchen, long after everyone else had gone to sleep. She had been called worse things in her life, but there was something about the way he had said worthless, so certain, so final, as though he had looked straight through her and found nothing there at all, that settled into her chest like a stone she could not put down. 2 days later, a guard came to find her in the laundry room and told her the king wished to see her. Elira's stomach dropped, certain she was about to be dismissed from the palace entirely, sent out into a world she knew nothing about, with no name and no coin. She followed the guard through corridors she had never been allowed to walk, until she reached the private study where Draven waited alone. He stood by the window, his back to her, looking out over the training grounds where soldiers moved through drills in the pale afternoon light. He did not turn around right away. "I have decided," he said finally, "that a servant who cannot show respect for this house has no place in it." "My king," Alira said carefully, "I have served this palace since I was a child. I have never given anyone reason to doubt my loyalty." Loyalty. He turned to face her now, his expression unreadable. "You speak as though loyalty were something you understand. You have no pack, Alira, no bloodline. Do you know what that means in this kingdom? It means you belong to no one, and no one is bound to protect you. You survive here because this palace allows it, nothing more." Something in Alira's chest tightened, not with fear this time, but with a quiet, burning anger she rarely let herself feel. "I have never asked this palace to protect me," she said. "I have earned my place here, with my own hands, every single day. You may call me worthless, my king, but I know what I am worth, even if you do not." Draven's eyes narrowed, surprised by the steadiness in her voice. He stepped closer, studying her, the way a man studies something he cannot quite explain. "You have no right to speak to me this way." "Then, banish me," Alira said, lifting her chin. "But I will not beg for a place I have already earned." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Draven's gaze dropped to her arm, where her sleeve had slipped slightly during her outburst, revealing a sliver of pale skin, marked with faint silver lines. His expression shifted, curiosity breaking through the coldness. "What is that?" Alira quickly pulled her sleeve down, but it was too late. "It is nothing. A birthmark." "Show me." His voice left no room for refusal. Reluctantly, she pushed back her sleeve, revealing the full mark, a crescent moon wrapped in delicate vines, glowing faintly silver even in the dim light of the study. Draven's breath caught. He had spent his whole life studying the old bloodline markings of the wolf packs, the symbols that identified the ancient houses, and though the shape before him was unlike anything currently known in the kingdom, something about it felt achingly familiar, like a word on the tip of his tongue. He reached out and closed his hand gently around her wrist, turning her arm toward the light. The moment his skin touched hers, the mark flared brighter, and Alira gasped as warmth spread up her arm, like sunlight breaking through cold water. "What trick is this?" Draven demanded, though his voice had lost its earlier certainty. "I do not know," Alira said honestly, her own eyes wide with shock. "It has never done this before." The mark grew brighter still, spreading light across the room, and Draven released her wrist and stepped back, his hand raised instinctively, as if to defend himself from something he did not understand. The floor beneath them began to hum, faint at first, then stronger, until fine lines of silver light traced themselves across the stone, in patterns older than the palace itself, symbols that had been buried and forgotten for centuries. The study door burst open as guards rushed in, drawn by the strange light pouring from beneath it, and behind them came several of Draven's generals, men who had fought at his side through every battle of his reign. They froze in the doorway, staring at Alira, who stood at the center of the room glowing like a second moon, the ancient symbols beneath her feet, pulsing in time with her heartbeat. One of the oldest generals, a gray-haired man named Corwin, who had served 3 generations of Ashgrave kings, sank slowly to his knees. His face had gone pale, and his voice, when it came, trembled with something between disbelief and reverence. "The Lunari mark," he whispered. "It cannot be. They were lost centuries ago." "What are you talking about?" Draven demanded, though even he could hear the mark's importance rising like a tide he could no longer control. "The Lunari bloodline, my king," Corwin said, still kneeling, still staring at Alira as though she might vanish if he looked away. "The first wolves, the line from which all packs descended, before the Ashgrave name, before any of the great houses. It was said the last of them died out generations ago, hunted and scattered in the wars that shaped this kingdom. Every pack law, every claim to the throne, all of it traces back to an oath sworn to the Lunari line, that should a true descendant ever be found, all packs would kneel before them, above even a king." The room seemed to hold its breath. Alira looked down at her own glowing skin, at the light pouring from a mark she had spent her whole life hiding out of fear and shame, and for the first time she understood why she had never quite belonged among the servants, why something in her had always felt like it was waiting for a door to open. Slowly, the light began to fade, retreating back into her skin until only a faint silver glow remained beneath the surface, like a lantern turned low. The symbols on the floor dimmed and disappeared, but the silence that followed was heavier than before, and every eye in the room, guards, generals, and king alike, remained fixed on her. Draven stood very still, his earlier certainty stripped away, replaced by something far more difficult for him to hold: humility. He looked at the woman he had called worthless in front of his entire court, the woman he had nearly banished from the only home she had ever known, and he understood now that by every old law his kingdom still honored, she outranked him entirely. "Illyra," he said, and her name sounded different in his mouth this time, careful, almost unsure. "I did not know." "No," she said quietly, "you did not." There was no cruelty in her voice, only a tired kind of honesty. "You saw a servant, with no name, and you decided that meant I had no worth. You were wrong. I always had it. You simply could not see it." Corwin and the other generals remained kneeling, their heads bowed, waiting for some signal from her, though Illyra had no idea what such a signal should look like. She had never asked for a crown, never dreamed of thrones or ancient oaths. She had only wanted to survive, to work hard enough that no one could call her worthless and mean it. And yet here she stood, marked by a bloodline older than the kingdom itself, watched by men who had spent their entire lives believing such a line was nothing but legend. Draven took a slow step forward, and then, to the shock of everyone in the room, he lowered himself to one knee before her, his head bowed in a way she was certain he had never bowed to anyone in his life. "Then let me be the first to see it clearly now," he said. "Whatever comes next, you will not walk through these halls unseen again." Illyra looked around the room, at the kneeling generals, at the guards who did not know where to look, at the king who had once dismissed her with a single cruel word, and now knelt before her with his pride laid bare on the floor between them. She felt no triumph in the moment, only a quiet, steady peace, the kind that comes from finally being seen for exactly who you are. "I never needed a crown to know my worth," she said softly. "But perhaps it took one for you to finally understand it." Outside the study window, the sun continued its slow path across the sky, indifferent to the quiet revolution taking place within those walls, unaware that the balance of an entire kingdom had just shifted, not through war or conquest, but through the simple, undeniable truth of a mark that had been waiting, patiently, for the right moment to shine.